Welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem. Today is the 23rd day of the month of Tishray. The year is 5783. It's October 18th, 2022. This coming Shabbat, we are reading Parshat Bereshit, translated as Genesis, because it is the first Parsha of the book of Genesis, the beginning of the reading of the Torah for the year. And of course, we began reading Bereshit just yesterday on Shmini Atzeret / Simchat Torah. Talk about that in a minute. This coming Tuesday, a week from this evening, is the first evening of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh celebration, Rosh Chodesh commemoration, ushering in the new month of Cheshvan, sometimes known as Mar Cheshvan, bitter Cheshvan, because of its lack of, I shall say now, traditional lack of holidays. But as I've emphasized in recent years, there are some new holidays, some new bright spots. Some are new, newly discovered, I should say, or newly appreciated. Special days in the month of Cheshvan. We'll be talking about that, if not later in this show, then later in the month. After all, it won't be till next week's Temple Talk that the month of Cheshvan will actually be beginning. So maybe we'll wait on that. Boy, there's so much happening, and so much has been happening. Of course, we just finished the Tishray Holidays, which began with Rosh Hashanah on the first 2 days of Tishrei, Yom Kippur on the 10th day, and then beginning on the 15th, the 7-day festival of Sukkot, and then yesterday, the additional 8th day, Shmini Atzeret, also known as Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah. And on Simchat Torah, we conclude the reading of the book of Deuteronomy with the blessings that Moshe gives to all of Israel, and we begin immediately after the conclusion of Deuteronomy. We begin with the opening verses of Genesis. Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created. There's no seam, there's no break between concluding the Torah and beginning it again, because it is with us all the time, and it just continues. It's like a Mobius strip. It has no beginning or end. And to emphasize that, the final letter of the final word of the book of Deuteronomy is a lamed. And that lamed is the last letter of the word Israel. Because that last verse in Deuteronomy is, "Never again has there arisen in Israel a prophet like Moshe, whom Hashem had known face to face, as evidenced by all the signs and wonders that Hashem sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his courtiers and all his land, and by the strong hand and awesome power that Moshe performed before the eyes of all Israel." Le'enei kol Yisrael, in that last letter of the word of Israel. Yisrael is lamed. And the first letter of the book of Genesis, the first letter of the first word Bereshit, in the beginning, is a bet. And lamed bet spells lev, heart, because the Torah is the beating heart of the nation of Israel. And so, yes, it's seamless. You cannot separate even the end, even the final words and letters of Deuteronomy are intricately and intrinsically connected to the opening letters and words of Bereshit, of Genesis. And that's really what it's all about. That's the celebration, that we end, we begin, and we carry on through for the next year. And as I've always said, and anybody who follows the Parsha, the Torah reading of each week, will tell you that it's always something new. You do it every year, and you read those same words, those same letters, but there's always something new that you discover, something that shocks you that you never knew before, something that surprises you, something that relates to what's happening to you personally, something that relates to what's happening in the news, it's uncanny, to say the least. It is just always, always relevant. You can never overread it. You can never read too much of it. You can never read it and not get anything out of it if you're paying attention. And of course, while this is true to a great extent in any language, in its native language, in the language in which it is originally written, Hebrew, there's just so many layers and so many subtexts and so many hidden meanings and messages in every letter, every word, every space between the letters. It's an endless study, and it's an endless joy in studying and learning and always discovering something new in the Torah. And that is what Simchat Torah is really all about. It's celebrating this wonderful bond that we have with HaShem, this bond which is written in throughout the Torah. That's what it is. The Torah is our bond with HaShem. You know, another fascinating thing that I'm just going to share with you now, just throw it out there. I read it was the last 3 verses that I read of the book of Deuteronomy. And that last verse says, "And by the strong hand and awesome power that Moshe performed before the eyes of all Israel." Yad Chazakah, right? Those are the words for strong hand, Yad Chazakah. So, Moshe performed all sorts of miracles in Egypt. He performed miracles. I mean, he was not the generator of the miracles. That was HaShem, but Moshe was the one who brought them before the people, let's say. And so the Torah is praising him after he's died now. This is hesped. This is a eulogy, really. He has just died, and the Torah is giving him his due. There's never risen a prophet in Israel like Moshe, whom Hashem had known face to face, right? We've learned previously that Hashem spoke to him mouth to mouth, and that Moshe was the most faithful servant in God's house. And here we are told that he had known Hashem and known Moshe face to face, as evidenced by all the signs and wonders that Hashem sent to perform in the land of Egypt. It's interesting because here they're emphasizing what happened in Egypt, not other things, right? Not striking the rock and having water coming out, not splitting the sea, not going up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. The Torah is emphasizing what happened there in Egypt. And then it says, and by the strong hand and awesome power that Moshe performed before the eyes of all Israel. So our sages have this fascinating comment on what's being referred to by Hayad HaChazakah, the strong hand. And it says, are you sitting down? It says, when Moshe shattered the 2 Luchot HaBrit, when he shattered the 2 tablets of the law, when he came down from Mount Sinai the first time after 40 days and 40 nights, and saw that Israel was dancing around the Egel HaZahav, around the golden calf, he shattered the 2 tablets of the law, and that was out of disgust with what was happening, but also in order to destroy the covenant, as it were, so that it couldn't be used as held up against Israel. It was if, okay, you know what, Israel screwed up, but it's not written anywhere, is it, that they shouldn't do this. So he did this amazing thing. He shattered something. We're taught by Midrash. Midrash tells us that the original tablets, the original stones, were prepared by HaShem. They were made of sapphire and prepared by HaShem during the 6 days of creation. And they waited all that time for over 2,000 years before they would fulfill their purpose, right? And Hashem engraved the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, on those stones with his own etzba, with his own finger, we're told in the Torah. And yet Moshe shattered it. And of course, the second set of stones, Moshe himself had to hew and he himself had to etch into it the Ten Commandments. So it was the same words, the same Ten Commandments, but on a whole lower metaphysical level, let's say. It didn't reach that metaphysical high of the first tablets. And this is what our sages say the Torah is praising Moshe for in these final words of the book of Deuteronomy, his final praise of Moshe, that he shattered the tablets of the law. And we could talk about that for a long, long time and have a really in-depth discussion of what our sages are saying, what they're getting at. But to just speak of it very briefly, I think that the message is that Moshe had the wherewithal to be able to handle this relationship between HaShem and Israel, between HaShem and his people, and almost like to finesse it in such a way as to cover all the bases, to keep them together, to keep the people and HaShem united. And this was Moshe's greatest strength, our sages are saying. Even greater than going up to Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights and without eating or drinking and being in God's direct presence. His greatest strength was bringing God's message to Israel and bringing it to Israel in a way that Israel could receive it and accept it. And when Israel wasn't capable of receiving it because it had erred, then he put that off. He delayed the reception by shattering the stones. I don't know if I'm saying it as best as it can be said. I'm sure I'm not. But I think that's what is happening. There's another fascinating aspect of Moshe's way of handling the relationship between Hashem and Israel, which we read. Very interesting that on the holiday of Shmini Atzeret, and Sukkot and Pesach, all those days we read passage from the book of Exodus when again after the sin of the golden calf, and Moshe is standing before Hashem, and Hashem says to Moshe, I want to destroy this people. They're a stiff-necked people. I want to wipe them out and make a new people out of you, Moshe. You're going to be the father of this nation. Because they're a stiff-necked people, right? They're stiff-necked, meaning they're stubborn. They're stubborn in their ways. They got a direct order that you're not going to you're not going to follow idolatry. And within less than 40 days after receiving that, they already strayed. And Moshe says, no, you have to forgive these people because they're a stiff-necked people. So Moshe doesn't say, they'll learn better. They'll learn to cooperate. They'll learn to do the right thing. He takes the same attribute that Hashem was using against Israel and uses it to defend Israel, saying they're a stiff-necked people, yes, but that's what's going to enable them to last throughout the ages, because they're going to go through such troubles and travails. And even though sometimes their stiff-necked quality is going to bring them down, other times it's going to get them through the toughest of times when they're being persecuted, when they're being executed, when genocide is being practiced against them, when they're being forced into poverty, when they're being forced into exile, when they're having to wander from one land to another because no one will have them. That quality of being stiff-necked will enable them to stick with you, Hashem. So that's why you need to hold on to these people. They're precious. They've got what it takes. And that was what convinced Hashem to retract his intentions and to renew his relationship with Israel. So Moshe, who ended his days in what we read yesterday, the following the closing chapters of Deuteronomy, was a master of maintaining. He was almost like a midwife between Israel and Hashem. He was a master of maintaining that relationship. And there's another fascinating thing I'd like to share with you also from this last Torah reading that we read yesterday, known as Zot HaBracha. This is the blessing, because it consists of Moshe's blessing to all the tribes of Israel just before he goes up the mountain Nevo, where he is able to look into the land he'll never enter into before he dies. And Zot HaBracha begins in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 1. And this is the blessing that Moshe, the man of God, bestowed upon the children of Israel before his death. V'zot habracha asher berach Moshe ish ha'Elohim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto. And this is the blessing that Moshe, the man of God, bestowed upon the children of Israel before his death. This is the first time Moshe is referred to as Ish ha'Elohim, the man of God. It seems natural, of course. If anybody's going to be called the man of God, it's Moshe. But again, what do our sages tell us? Why is he here referred to him as the man of God? Because here's when he blesses Israel. That's how he became a man of God, by blessing Israel. First of all, when we bless someone, anyone, we are bestowing upon them, we are channeling God's goodness, God's hesed, his loving kindness through ourselves. We're sort of conjuring it up. We're sort of calling upon God to manifest his goodness in us, that we can pass it on to another. And passing on that goodness, sharing that blessing is acting godly. And that's what earns us the title of Ish Elohim. In this case, of course, Moshe was blessing all of Israel. And this was, in a way, the most significant act that Moshe could do. And again, what a wonderful way to conclude his days on earth. What a wonderful way to conclude his 37th day. If we recall, the book of Deuteronomy consists all of the words of Moshe that he addressed to Israel for the final 37 days of his life. And much of that was castigation for past sins and for future sins that Israel hadn't even committed yet, but Moshe was certain that they would. And a lot of it was just rebuke and insisting that Israel, stay in line and act properly. And there were some obviously super inspiring passages about the land, what awaits Israel, and how Israel will create a society and a government and a way of life, a Torah way of life in the land after he's gone and they've entered the land. But after all that, Moshe blesses each of the tribes with beautiful blessings and leaves this earth on a very, very high note and with a very, very good message to all of Israel. And that is a very beautiful way to end the 5 books of Moses as we call it, the Chamisha Humshot Torah of Moshe. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But again, immediately when we read that final verse, concluding with Yisrael, concluding with the letter Lamed, we continue right on into Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz va'aretz hayata tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei ha'tom v'ruach Elohim merahevet al pnei hamayim v'yomer Elohim yehi or v'yehi or v'yar Elohim et ha'or ki tov v'yavdel Elohim bein ha'or uvein ha'choshech v'yikra Elohim la'or yom v'la'choshech kara laila v'yehi erev v'yehi voker yom echad. In the beginning of God's creating. I'm going to explain why this particular stone edition, this is the Art Scroll translation, why they translate it that way. In the beginning of God's creation, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered over the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. God called to the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. So thus begins the 6 days of creation, of course, which concludes with the seventh day, which is the Shabbat, the Sabbath, the day of rest. And Bereshit bara Elokim doesn't usually translated as "in the beginning God created." It doesn't really mean that. It means "in the beginning of God created." Bereshit is a my English vocabulary isn't good enough to give it the right word, but it's part of a phrase. There should be another word after it, like "in the beginning of this" or "in the beginning of that." For example, there are some verses in the Torah that say Bereshit Chochmah, in the beginning of wisdom. What sets off wisdom. So here we're missing that word. It just says Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning of something. So what is the beginning of? The beginning of time. Here, the art scroll it's a very creative and very beautiful interpretation. In the beginning of God's creating. I think that's a very elegant way to handle this. I don't know that it really adds anything to the discussion, but again, it's a mystery. But by changing it by reading it accurately, I should say, instead of in the beginning of, it gives us a deeper insight into what's going on here. Time and space they're all created. And creation cannot exist without time or space. That's why the first word is in the beginning. But in the beginning of what? In the beginning of the beginning? In the beginning of God's inspiration to create? It's an open question, and we can answer in all sorts of ways, and the deepest answers will lead us to all different amazing understandings of creation and of God's intention in creating. But I say this also because, it's almost the 6 days of creation. The first day, the second day, God created the world in 6 days. First of all, the first time the word yom, Hebrew word yom, which means day, is ever mentioned in the Torah is right here. It's only later that day defines a 24-hour period. Do you get what I'm saying at? That right here, we don't know what day is. It's a time period, it would appear. It has an evening and a morning and a night and a darkness and a light, but it's not. We don't know that it's 24 hours. We don't know that it could be 24 million light years. We don't know. It's not defined. So my point is not that the Torah is being evasive here. My point is that the Torah is much bigger, much greater, much deeper than very simple, literal translations of its message, of its words. And again, if you read it very carefully and keep this in mind, and if you can read it with the Hebrew, then you'll see in every sentence, every verse, there's new insights, new mysteries, new depths, new understandings of what the creation was all about, and the brilliance of the order and the way in which God created. And it's something that's, you can study endlessly, and we do study it endlessly, because the point is not in the details of how God created, but in why God created. If the physicists and the scientists want to try to determine the age of the creation and, how it happened, that's all fascinating. And that all is knowledge that may come in handy. But what we're trying to understand always is what was God's intention in creating. And the short answer is that God was all. God is everything. God is the only thing. God is everywhere. God is beyond everywhere. And God it lacks nothing, but God, as it were, lacked one thing, and that was upon whom or what to bestow his goodness. God wanted to give of his infinite self, and there was no one to give to. So God, from within his infinite self, created a world that was within his infinite self, but also separated from his infinite self, so that he could give, he could bestow goodness on that world. That's the intention of creation. And with that in mind, we understand the story that the Torah is going to tell us in the following verses and chapters and books. The story of God sharing his goodness, his will, his ratzon, his intentions with mankind. And of course, there are bumpy starts. Originally, God wanted to share his world with Adam, with the first man, in the Garden of Eden. That was enough. But that got off to a bumpy start, so history was born out of that. When man when man left the Garden of Eden, and I like to say that man wasn't exiled by HaShem. Man exiled himself from the holiness and goodness and perfection of the Garden of Eden by lowering himself. He lowered the reality around himself. He lowered the Garden of Eden into a place of thorns and thistles. And that became the reality that man lives in. But from that point on, there's been an uphill climb toward reconnecting with HaShem. And of course, it's not going to happen right away in the book of Genesis. It only happens with Abraham in the 20th generation. First, we're going to read about the first 10 generations of man and sort of a decline throughout those generations till we reach the bottom with the generation of the flood and Noah. And from Noah, there's more fits and starts until Avraham. And Avraham was really the first human being that sought out HaShem and responded to HaShem's reaching out to create a bond between man and God. So that, in a nutshell, is what Bereshit, what Genesis is getting at, what it wants to relate. And a lot of the details in creation, in the story of creation, you know what, if you follow them and you map it out and you work it out, it makes it modern science hasn't really changed the story. It may add details, it may talk about in units of time that are in billions of light years, whatever, but it's basically the same parameters, the same dynamics, even the same order of creation. And that is all fascinating. And but again, the point of the 6 days of creation was to get to the creation of man, and the point of creating man was to create a partner for HaShem in managing creation, in perfecting creation, in caring for creation, and in having a relationship. And that is the motivation for creation. And if you can come up with a different motivation, a higher motivation, I challenge you. I don't think there's anything more beautiful, more amazing, more perfect than this understanding that God created the world in order to bestow his goodness upon the world. Some people say there's no God in the world. Well, how could it be this? How could there be pain? How could there be suffering? Well, you know what? The world's not perfect. Man's not perfect. and life isn't simple, but it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be simple. And man has also had a great part in bringing the world to this situation of imperfection. But the point is for God to share His goodness, and for man to respond, and for man to help to perfect creation. That is to make it perfect, to smooth out the bumps, and to repair the cracks. And this is a huge responsibility and a huge privilege. And when HaShem told Adam in the Garden of Eden, you need to guard over and to tend to the garden, that's what Hashem's talking about. The garden is creation, and it's our responsibility to oversee it, and to look after it, and to make sure it stays healthy, and to make sure it lives. And are we doing a good job? I think we all know that man is not doing such a great job, but that's not a reason to be discouraged. That's a reason to buckle down and to work harder at it. So all this, as you can see, it's a very inspiring moment in the year when we turn that corner from the conclusion of Deuteronomy to the beginning of Genesis. And we do that on this 8th day, right? It's a very beautiful transition in the Torah reading itself that we read in synagogue, from Deuteronomy to the 7 days of creation, concluding with the Sabbath and the sanctification of the Sabbath. And then we read the Torah reading that describes Shmini Atzeret, and it says on the 8th day. So it's as if all of a sudden, instead of a 7-day week, we've had an additional 8th day, a day that wasn't part of creation originally, but here it's been created. Extra day for Hashem and Israel. And we mentioned this, if you follow our Facebook page, we've posted about this, and in our newsletter we've talked about this, that throughout the 7 days of Sukkot, it's a very open festival. The Gentiles are invited by the prophet Zechariah. He says the Gentiles should come up at the end of days and celebrate the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, that is Sukkot. And this is a sign of their commitment to Hashem. And not only that, on the festival of Sukkot throughout the 7 days, there are the total of 70 bulls which are offered. They're offered on behalf of the 7 primordial nations, that is the 7 original nations of the world, from which all other nations have spawned. So it's a very public, very open, very worldly, cosmopolitan, and all-embracing festival. But that 8th day, Hashem is saying to Israel, okay, everybody else can go home now. I want an extra day just with Israel. And on that day, what do we celebrate? How do we celebrate our deep bond, our eternal bond with Hashem? By celebrating the Torah, by concluding and beginning the Torah, starting anew, starting afresh. That's how we bring in the new year. And in addition to all this celebration, we also add the beautiful prayer for rain, because beginning with the conclusion of the holiday season, in the month of Tishray, we begin to not pray for rain yet, but mention God's mastery over the rain. Because we don't pray for rain yet, because the pilgrims still need to arrive home, and we give them 2 weeks to arrive home before we actually actively begin to pray for rain, because rain is so necessary to our lives, and it's a sign of God's connection with us, and it's a sign of God's blessing, and it's what we're looking forward to in this upcoming season. And so now, for one very last time, I wish everybody a very, very good upcoming year. May we all be blessed with good things. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.